The reason why many people apologize without admitting that they were wrong is because the ego cannot renounce itself. Something else has to renounce the ego. And that something else is the consciousness of awareness. Awareness has to see clearly the truth about our action or about our behavior and see that truth without hiding from it. And when this happens in right order, if there's a true deep perception coming from our awareness, then this causes an emotional reverberation in us, which is sometimes called conscience. And this is sort of the emotional side of conscious awareness. What happens most of the time is one of two things. Either the seeing of the truth of our action or our behavior is obscured, it's buffered in some way, our awareness is diverted away from it. We convince ourselves we didn't actually do anything wrong. And when we do that, our ego gets reinforced because we think we are right. We did wrong, so to speak, wrong, but we are convinced in ourselves that we did right. And nothing changes. The other thing that usually happens as an alternative is instead of this emotional reverberation, sometimes called conscience, which is a pure emotional reaction in ourselves based on seeing the truth, which often is painful. But what happens is instead of understanding what this is and how it's operating in us and how it's related to awareness itself, it gets filtered through the ego and then we feel guilty. And so now guilt supplants what rightfully should be conscience. And this feeling of guilt can also take on a dimension of what is called shame. So now not only do we feel guilty, we feel shame. We're ashamed. We belittle ourselves now. We not only feel guilty in relation to other people, we in effect feel guilty in relation to ourselves, and we're ashamed. And even if we do glimpse the truth of what happened, not only may we feel guilty, or may we feel ashamed, or may we completely obscure and buffer the truth. Another thing that can happen is we're afraid. We're afraid if it's recognized that we did wrong, that we will be in trouble, that we'll get punished for it. It can have legal implications in some cases. But we don't want to be found wrong in the eyes of others because we are afraid that there will be negative consequences. They won't like us, they will shun us, perhaps they will punish us, and there will be this sort of social abnegation from our peers or our family members or our co-workers. And the actuality of having to go through that is too painful. And so we divert away from that and we avoid a deeper experience of what is called conscience. And we don't realize that when we push the realization of conscience away, we are also pushing away awareness. We are pushing away the clarity of awareness, the purity of awareness. We're now distorting it, almost corrupting it. And the inner core of our being can begin to atrophy. This happens so frequently that there's a kind of a cycle that begins to develop. And it goes something like this. Person A commits some kind of action or exhibits some kind of behavior in relation to person B, and person B's ego is offended. And so now they feel resentful and they feel wrong was done toward them in some way. And especially if it was directed personally at them, they take offense, their ego does. And now this battle sort of begins between the two egos. And person B is expecting an apology of some kind. Person A doesn't want to admit that they were wrong. So now this resentment begins to build on the part of person B. And then maybe person A does offer a little sort of superficial apology. They don't admit they're wrong, but they offer an apology of some kind. So now this appeases, it assuages the resentment in person B, who then offers a kind of superficial level of forgiveness. Okay, thanks, you apologized, I forgive you, we're good. But because there was no wrong that was ever admitted from person A, and because person B now, having accepted this superficial apology and offered in return some superficial forgiveness, they have an expectation that everything's well. But because person A never admitted they were wrong, they're very apt to repeat the same thing in another circumstance. As soon as the right forces come together and the opportunity presents itself, they will do it again. This is also, you see this in this cycle. The behavior repeats. And then, of course, the resentment comes back. And now there's resentment and anger, and now maybe less inclination to apologize, less inclination to forgive. This interplay happens, and the egos not only remain intact, they become more firmly entrenched in themselves. And each finds it more difficult to navigate out of that entrenchment and to maneuver back into free, open ground where conscience and consciousness can expand, where the two of them can become more possible more often in a more fruitful way. But this doesn't happen. This is the exception, because in most cases, our egos burrow deeper and deeper into themselves, into the feeling that we are right, the other person is wrong, and then we continue to live from there. And this happens between individuals, it happens between families, and then of course it can happen on the scale of a country, two countries going to war, all because there was a lack of pure seeing by awareness and a lack of conscience operating in such a way as to steer us away from these holes that we keep digging for ourselves individually and collectively.